As discussed in the previous video about the various types of fallacies, the second type of informal fallacies is the fallacy of presumption, and it also fails to provide adequate reason for believing the truth of their conclusions. In these instances, the erroneous reasoning results from an implicit supposition of some further proposition whose truth is uncertain or implausible. Again, we will consider each of them in turn, seeking always to identify the unwarranted assumption upon which it is based. The first is accident. The fallacy of accident begins with the statement of some principle that is true as a general rule, but then errs by applying the principle to a specific case that is unusual or atypical in some way. The example of this would be women earn less than men earn for doing the same work. Oprah Winfrey is a woman. Therefore, Oprah Winfrey earns less than male talk show hosts. As soon we'll see, a true universal premise would entail the truth of this conclusion, but then a universal statement that every woman earns less than any man would obviously be false. The truth of a general rule, on the other hand, leaves plenty of room for exceptional cases, and applying it to any of them is fallacious. Moving on, the fallacy of converse accident begins with the specific case that is unusual or atypical in some way, and then errs by deriving from this case the truth of a general rule. The example of this would be Dennis Rodman wears earrings and is an excellent rebounder. Therefore, people who wear earrings are excellent rebounders. It should be obvious that a single instance is not enough to establish the truth of such a general principle. Since it is easy for this conclusion to be false even though the premise is true, the argument is unreliable. The third type of fallacies of presumption is the fallacy of false cause. This infers the presence of a causal connection simply because events appear to occur in correlation. One example of this would be saying, "The moon was full on Thursday evening. On Friday morning, I overslept. Therefore, the full moon caused me to oversleep." Later, we will consider what sort of evidence adequately supports the conclusion that a causal relationship does exist, but these fallacies clearly are not enough. Then we have begging the question. Begging the question is the fallacy of using the conclusion of an argument as one of the premises offered in its own support. Although this often happens in an implicit or disguised fashion, an explicit version would look like this. All dogs are mammals. All mammals have hair. Since animals with hair bear live young, dogs bear live young. But all animals that bear live young are mammals. Therefore, all dogs are mammals. Unlike the other fallacies we've considered, begging the question involves an argument or chain of arguments that is formally valid. If its premises, including the first, are true, then the conclusion must be true. But the problem is that this valid argument does not really provide support for the truth of its conclusion. We can't use it unless we already have that granted. The last type is complex question. The fallacy of complex question presupposes the truth of its own conclusion by including it implicitly in the statement of the issue to be considered. For example, saying, "Have you tried to stop watching too much television? If so, then you admit that you do watch too much television. If not, then you must still be watching too much television. Therefore, you watch too much television." In a somewhat more subtle fashion, this involves the same difficulty as the previous fallacy. We would not willingly agree to the first premise unless we already accept the truth of the conclusion that the argument is supposed to prove.